coming here, and I just want to echo something on the affordability. I was at a forum yesterday, TPPF put something on, and Chuck DeVore spoke about the fact that the poverty rate is calculated in an incorrect way across this nation. It doesn't take into account affordability. It doesn't take into account actual costs on a local level. And they actually have another measure that the federal government has about that, and it's a different poverty measure, but it incorporates the local costs. And he explained how in Texas and California, similar demographic populations. But it turns out that California has a higher poverty rate. It's like 23% versus about 18% in Texas. And when you drill down and you look at the difference, it's all about the affordability factor. And the affordability factor is all related to the local government costs and other things. You just think about if it's harder for a builder to build an apartment, that translates into higher rents that someone who makes $10 an hour has to pay. And so I think you can really talk about how affordability in Austin does in fact relate to, is Austin enabling people to build and buy the kind of housing they need, or the kind of rules that are being made. When we keep Walmart out, are we having a clean neighborhood, or are we having a neighborhood that's less affordable because people can't shop at a place that actually has low prices? So I think you're tapping into something that is important, not just locally, but I think if you think about what's going on nationally and how Republicans and Democrats need to compete for different voter pools, there is a huge number of people who are being left out. The Democrats accuse the Republicans of being for the 1%, and that's wrong. But there's an element of truth to that. When Romney talked about the 47% and just kind of wrote them off, that wasn't just a political gaffe. I mean, it expressed something that we as Republicans really need to respond to appropriately. So I'll use that to segue into the wonderful thing you did last week, which is going to the Juneteenth and talking to communities that aren't traditionally Republican. Because we need to be talking to people who don't, if you're making $10 or $14 an hour, we have to have policies that help people in that situation. We have to have policies that genuinely reflect what minority populations or people in different parts of town, urban or rural, we need to have policies that work for those people as a whole. Or we're not going to appeal to them, and we're not going to succeed either on the policy level or on the political battlefield. So, like I said, let me segue into Brendan, who is now working for this campaign, Keep It Red. You are from Texas, right?
I am, yeah.
You go to UT?
Born in Shiner, Texas.
That is so German, immigrant Texan, third or fourth generation?
Yeah.
Cool. And I recall seeing you first. You were part of YCT, so I recall running into you maybe 10 years ago those days. Yeah. But you then moved to Washington. You did some stuff up there. Got a higher graduate degree. Is that right?
Yes.
And that bio stuff. I'm forgetting the exact name of the degree. It was some complicated international. What was it?
Statecraft and International Affairs.
There you go.
So,
yeah,
if I learned anything in grad school, it's the world is a mess. It's playing out.
Figure that out, yeah. Just, and then now you came back, recruited back by the Cornyn folks, leading the Cornyn campaign. And so Brendan's here to tell us about that, about how that campaign is going to help not just one candidate, but all the candidates in the party and the cause, so to speak, as a whole in Texas, beat back the insurgent attempts of the Democrats to try to actually win a statewide race. So without further ado, Brendan.
Excellent. My name is Brendan Steinhauser. I'm from Flatonia, Texas, a tiny little town in Fayette County. Went to UT in 2000 and was there in 2004, and that's kind of where I got involved in politics. And the Young Conservatives of Texas is an organization that does great work around the state. They do legislative ratings, They get involved in races. There were a lot of YCT alumni on the various campaigns this term actually. Ellie Griffin working for Dan Patrick, myself working for John Cornyn. David White ran Glenn Hager's campaign. Travis McCormick ran Wayne Christian's campaign. He wasn't successful. But there are a lot of YCT folks, young people involved in the process. And so I was really just excited to find them when I was at UT, a very liberal university, of course. But I got started there, and I moved in 2005. I moved to Washington to work for Dick Armey, former House Majority Leader, and Freedom Works, an organization at the time that kind of had split off from Americans for Prosperity back in 2003, 2004, but the same lineage there. So moved to DC in 2005, and one of the things that I brought with me was kind of that YCT approach to politics. We were rabble-rousers, we would do teach-ins, we would do protests, counter-protests. We learned a lot from the left and the way that they would do things on campus, and I was always kind of impressed with how the left approached politics from a very revolutionary perspective, in the sense that most of them they view their political ideology as a religion almost. Whereas we have our religion and we have our community and our families and work, and then we have politics because we have to, because we want to be left alone, essentially, I think, is why most conservatives, libertarians, Republicans are involved in politics at all. So kind of took that approach, that mindset to DC, worked there for Freedom Works 2005, 6, 7, 8. Started to kind of see some of the things going on even within our own party. Big government policies, bailouts, things like that. And what I saw in the fall of 2008 was something that I think I'd always kind of dreamed of as a young, idealistic, conservative activist. And it was an awakening by the American people. In the fall of 2008, I remember sitting in my office and my phone line was just lighting up, emails blowing up from regular people who had found our organization because we had a petition against the Wall Street bailout. So that was, to me, the actual birth of the Tea Party movement. It was actually prior to the election in 2008. It was prior to Barack Obama's election, despite what people have now said to rewrite history. That was the birth. In February 2009, of course, they tried to push the stimulus program, and the first protests started to happen in early February 2009. So our organization, myself, got really involved just trying to help people find permits. We would encourage them to protest, and they would say, well, I've never done this before, how do I do it? Well, you get a permit, and you contact people, and you show up and contact the media and let them know. So we really walked people through how to do the whole idea of protesting, which on February 19th or 20th, Rick Santelli goes on this famous rant, and it's termed now the Tea Party movement. So I was kind of there at the beginning to help and to watch this thing get started and to launch and become a movement. And again, a lot of the tactics, a lot of the way we approach politics was things we learned from the left. I mean, how many conservatives have studied Gandhi or have studied the end of apartheid in South Africa, have studied the American Civil Rights Movement? We don't read this literature. We don't see ourselves as part of that history, but there is so much to learn there. People fighting for their freedom in their very own way in different cultures, different countries around the world. And so we studied that stuff, and we tried to apply that to the Tea Party movement. We had all kinds of great conversations about mass movements and organizations, and there was a time when we weren't clear if the Tea Party movement was going to become a political entity at all. In fact, we had to do a lot of convincing for people to get involved in the political process. These are people who were not very happy with either party. They didn't want to get involved in the dirty business of politics. I understand that. But we said, look, you've got to get involved. You've got to become the party you want it to be. And so it took time, but the first big election we were involved in was Scott Brown's election in Massachusetts. So we saw people flocking from all over the country to go to Massachusetts to help Scott Brown win that election. And then later on, we helped candidates like Mike Lee take out a longtime incumbent, Bob Bennett in Utah. We helped get behind folks like Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Pat Toomey, Ron Johnson, a lot of key people who are in the Senate right now. And so that's kind of my experience, 2005, 2012. I spent a lot of time in Texas helping Ted Cruz become a U.S. Senator. And I remember he always tells a story about being behind, being 2% in the polls, and there was a 3-point margin of error. But people actually, a lot of the media here in Texas still do not understand Ted Cruz's victory and kind of how it happened, why it happened, the components of it, and why he's still been really successful today. And I think that he and his team and a lot of just grassroots folks do understand because they've had that experience of kind of the Tea Party movement. So I think why Cruz was really successful and why is similar to why Barack Obama was successful in 2008, and why a lot of our candidates were successful in 2010, 2012 with this historic victory we had in 2010 in particular. It was the combination of online, social media, digital strategy, and face-to-face communications and outreach, real grassroots work. You couldn't fake that stuff. Barack Obama had both. He had real energy, enthusiasm, and a smart team who knew how to do the digital side of things. But they also knew how to do the field work. And what they did was they integrated it so that they were the same thing. It wasn't just, oh, go do your social media stuff on Twitter, whatever y'all do, and Facebook and other things, and then we're going to do the field work, and we're going to get people to the caucuses. He integrated it. I think the Cruz team did that well also. And of course, they had a phenomenal candidate who had the ability to raise money, smartest guy in every room he goes into, a lot of these other factors. So you look at what Obama did in 2008, and it's sort of like this, it was a huge, made a huge impact in the political world, and everybody's still studying it, and there's a lot of mythology around it, what actually happened versus what people say happened. And the same with Cruz. You read about, you read journalists talking about what his election meant or means or why he's been successful, and they really don't understand this nexus. And so I think that from my perspective, I understand it. I think that I've learned from it. I think that we've done some of it. And so for me, what I want to do is help. Basically, the theme of this would kind of be building the Republican Party of the 21st century. We are lagging in a lot of ways in the digital side, we're lagging in the field, and we're lagging in how we integrate them. Whereas some candidates have done that very well, others are struggling. In the party in whole, I think there's good news, there's bad news on both sides of that. But I do think we're heading in the right direction. But when I sat down with Senator Cornyn last year in San Antonio, he said, I want to talk to you about coming to work for me and being my campaign manager. He said, I probably won't have a lot of trouble. I'll probably win in the primary and the general. I want to make sure of that. I want your help. But he's like, I want to help the party grow and change and build. I want to be more welcoming to new non-traditional voters. But I also want to be who we are. I want to be conservatives. I want to focus on the issues that move people. And so we talked a lot about kind of why the Tea Party was successful. He asked, why do you think Cruz was successful? What are the things that really matter? Can we do what Barack Obama did in 2008? And I said, yeah, I think we can. There's a lot of smart people out there, but the business model has to change, and the approach has to change, and the incentive structure has to change so that the guys that just make all their 15% cut on TV ads aren't preventing us from doing the kinds of things we need to do. So we need to invest in digital. We need to invest in it as a real part of what we're doing. We need to go and do the real kind of face-to-face outreach. Absolutely.
It's hard. I don't know if you have an honest answer, perhaps, since you work for him, but do you feel Cornyn gets it with respect to what you just said in terms of how the Republican Party needs to change, both on the political level and kind of how we're trying to serve conservative issues and causes?
I do. I think that he understands there's tension everywhere, and I see the tension in everything we do in the face-to-face outreach, the phone calls, the polling. And one of the biggest elephant in the room is something like immigration, for example. But I think that the conversations that we've had are built around the idea: can we be a big tent, but not go? Can we stick to our principles? And I really believe we can. I can provide some evidence of that, some anecdotal evidence, and some polling evidence, and I think that if we don't figure this out, we're all in trouble, right? The whole thing, from the Tea Party side to kind of the more regular Republican side, I think we're in trouble if we don't get it right. And so someone who, has spent my career, 90% of it kind of in the Tea Party world, and now is in more of the Republican regular world with donors and with elected officials who's been there since 2002 as a senator and before that public office, I think that I have a unique perspective to kind of bring to that. He's very serious about this work. He's very focused on especially the digital side. He wants to help create a model in Texas for the party and for our campaign that then can be exported to other state parties, into the RNC, the NRIC, and elsewhere. So, and the other thing is he relies on us. He relies on Josh, my political director, myself, and others, the rest of the team to say, here's what we think we need to do, we ought to do, here's where we need to put resources, and he's given us a lot of leeway to do that. And sometimes you tell your boss, and Blaine knows this too, you give the best advice you can, and sometimes they take it, sometimes they don't, and sometimes, but your job is to help provide good political advice, but also your job is to get them reelected. But he said to me, I want you to do more. I don't want your job to just be that, because that wouldn't be any fun, and I want to do other things. So he's using his resources.
But you're saying he's letting you basically say, here's how we need to do it, and not use what you said, like this old model. I mean,
we've got a ton of
driven.
Yeah.
Let's spend it all on TV and forget the field.
Absolutely. And it is a struggle, because there are entrenched interests, and it's also a learning curve. And again, I'm not an expert in everything, but I know this vision and I know where I need to go. So the first hire I made was the right person to do the job of the political director that Josh, y'all meet in a couple of months, who really can get down to the nitty-gritty on the digital side. But to be able to put the resources in, and to give me that ability to hire who I want, and to say, here's the vision, sign onto this plan, this budget, and for him to do that, that wasn't a foregone conclusion. So he's a great guy, great boss. I love working for him, and one of the things he's great at is just sort of, he delegates, and he says, if you can prove this model works, we'll keep investing in it. So I think that we're, from our perspective, I can provide some details and kind of some examples, but we have tried a lot of the things I'm talking about. What the Obama people did well, that I think my takeaway really is that it was kind of data-driven decision making, right? So at a very high level, they didn't go out there and just have a gut feeling and say, we've got to, to win, this is what we've got to do. They knew what they had to do based on information, based on evidence, based on what they were learning from the field. They knew at the Iowa caucuses, for example, they had to change the makeup of the caucus. Hillary would win by 10 points if the same people who showed up this time, were the people that showed up last time. So everything they did was based on this idea of making decisions on information received, and not just, here's the way it's always been done. And I've worked in 40 different states around the country. I don't claim to be an expert in every state, or in Texas, even Texas politics. But even here, there's kind of a culture of like, every campaign is run this way. You go line up these endorsements, and you go get these people on your campaign, and you'll be successful. But I think that model is old, and I think that the new model is more the stuff that we're talking about. It's much more based on things you can actually measure. Why in business do we measure everything, right? And in politics, we measure nothing. Is a TV ad effective? What's the return on investment, ROI? What's on the digital front, on the grassroots front, messaging, fundraising? What's working and what's not? Why is everything just, we do a bunch of stuff and then there's no information coming back? So everything we're trying to do is basically flip that whole thing on its head and say, we know what we think, and we know what our gut is, and we have pretty good political instincts, but what are we actually hearing from people? What can we actually measure? So again, a lot of this goes back to systems and not to get into all the weeds, but databases, systems, methodology, things that actually can achieve these goals. And so the first thing that we have to do as a party, and that we're trying to do on the campaign, is figure out the database problem. A lot of the information from different candidates and from different party at the county level, the state level, or even parties, like the state party in Texas versus the one in Louisiana, the information between the Texas Republican Party and the RNC. There's not a lot of good information flow right now. So you have all this stuff overlapping. You've got atrophy. You've got people who've died and moved. And you have all this stuff, and it all exists in 100 different places, and it's not being filtered in the same place. And every election cycle, we do the same thing. So to the RNC's credit, they've recognized this problem, and they're trying to fix it, and they brought some smart people in to try and do that. To the Republican Party of Texas' credit, they've done the same thing. They bought into this idea that all the information that we get goes flow into the same place. We're sort of getting pointed in the right direction. We're on the right track. One of the other things, though, we're trying to do is everything that we're doing in our campaign is also based around what are people saying, what issues do people care about, what do we know about them. We're using our database, which is called Nation Builder, to try and build what I call a 360-degree view of an individual, whether it's a donor, an activist, a voter. So you take the voter data that everyone has access to, and you combine that with a ton of information, petitions on issues. So we can know the individual person, did they sign a petition on guns? Did they sign a petition on immigration? What's their view on that? What's their Twitter handle, their Facebook profile? How much money have they given? Nation Builder even tracks for us every communication my field staff has with every, activist or voter or county chairman. So I can kind of come in and see where the conversation left off. It's a great way to take this institutional knowledge, what people care about, relationships, fights that, people have in the community that don't like each other, and to put it all in one place so that, when this campaign is over, we have that for the next year, the next 2 years, the next 10 years. That stuff changes. Go ahead.
Just the Nation Builder, I'm not clear, is this a Korn software tool, is this RNC? Or
It's a vendor, it's a private vendor, and it's the CRM that we use, and I know others have used it, other candidates, but the way we're doing this is our information will then flow into this database that RPT has and RNC has. That's called Data Trust. That's kind of the Republican National Committee database of all databases. So the idea is that you can use whatever tools you want as long as the information flows back into this central place. And if the parties do that, if the candidates do that at every level, it'll get better and better over time, and it won't cost so much money to kind of keep it up. So let's see. So our approach is very much integrating, again, online and offline. This is what you have to really do well to win. So, for example, we're spending a ton of money on digital. As a percentage of our overall paid media budget, it was somewhere around 20-25%, which is higher than just about any other campaign in the country. It's on par with more, in the corporate world. Spending 25% on digital is pretty good, even in the corporate world. So you still need to do TV, you still need to do radio, but we're really at the cutting edge in terms of the percentage that we spend on digital. But what are we spending it on, and how are we utilizing it? So it's mostly the Google AdWord network. It's Facebook ads, and it's targeted to voters. So we've been able to take the actual voter list, overlay that with Facebook. So we're targeting actual registered voters, and by demographics, by messages. We're breaking it down to geography, slightly different messages to different people. But we're also getting them to take some action, whether it's sign a petition or give money or tell us to go to hell or whatever it is. But we can track that, put it back in the system, and over time, you develop a better and better system. So through that process, and mostly through advertising, we've probably gained our new Facebook fans by 10, 12, 15 cents a like, very low. We've grown from 25,000 on Facebook to 375,000 in 10 months, which I don't think anyone I love Rick Perry and Greg Abbott, but we passed them. And that's, I have to give most of the credit to Josh and our team for implementing this strategy. But we've been able to do that in tremendous, just very low cost, very cost effective, and it's all about the right content to the right person at the right time. And so knowing how to do that, and then knowing what to do with it when you actually get people to like the page and engage them, and having a good engagement rate is also important. So we're growing. Our email list is growing. When we first came on the campaign, Cornyn hadn't run since 2008, so they didn't really have much of a campaign apparatus going. By the way, those days are over. You can't do that anymore. You got to keep it going year in, year out. But when we came aboard in July of last year, we basically increased the open rates, the click-through rates on our emails by a couple hundred percentage points. So it's through the roof. We're getting really good response rates, 20% open rate, 25% click-through rate, things like that we didn't have in the past. So people are actually engaging with the content. Again, part of that is good writing, and Josh is a brilliant direct mail fundraising guy. Part of that is just knowing your audience and being able to deliver that information. So that's all happening. So we're seeing growth, we're seeing high engagement levels, and we're building this system of people, this database of people that we know what they care about, and we know kind of a little bit something about them. But on the other side of that too is the field work. So our approach to field is very much quality and quantity. So we do encourage our guys to go out and get a lot of signups, but to make sure these are key leaders in the community. These are people that can then be people that would introduce us to other folks in the community. When we were at Juneteenth, there were a couple guys there, Corey and Mike, who were just Republican Party activists, but they just seemed like they either knew everybody or they knew the people that knew everyone there. And so they were making introductions to James, Dickey, and myself, kind of trailing them, and they were like, oh, this is James, this is Brendan. here's what they do. And that, the power of that relationship is something you can't fake. You can't create out of thin air. So the key though is when you go to the Juneteenth Festival, when you go to the Veterans of the Barrio Parade, the key is really making those connections, building those relationships, but also finding a way to get that information, getting the data, right? So that when we go, we know we met this pastor who has a huge church with 300 people and wants the senator to come speak. So getting him to make sure he's in the database, we know him. All Republican candidates should know who this guy is because he has that in with the community. It's not complicated, really. It just hasn't been systematized, and a lot of this outreach in the non-traditional Republican voters hasn't been done. So we're showing up, which is a big deal. Democrats are like this. Literally, what the hell are you doing here? The voters, the people there appreciate it. And what did they talk about? This is, the audience, I guess, was 99% African American. What did they talk about when you ask them issues they care about? My property taxes are too high. I want a better school for my children. And the criminal justice system is biased toward African Americans and giving awful sentences for people that have a small amount of marijuana. That's what they talk about. I mean, time and time again, young black men are worried about the criminal justice system. Homeowners are worried about property taxes. The moms are worried about, education for their children. I mean, everybody would talk about. Those are issues we can connect with people on. But again, the trick is we build a relationship face to face. We get their information. We find a way to do something with them and get them in the system so that now everyone has access. In a lot of ways, there's been a natural division of labor, too, between what Cornyn's doing and what Abbott's doing. Abbott is very much focused on numbers, Republican voters more than anything. They're doing a good job in the Latino community as well, but especially from the paid media side and things like that. We're really going in trying to be kind of the tip of the spear in the minority communities and create these relationships that then we can make introductions and say, oh yeah, you should know this guy from Greg Abbott's team, or we should get Abbott to come speak to this group as well. And so it's kind of a natural fit. The key is all this information is flowing in the same place. So I think we're at the beginning of this. I think that I'm very hopeful and very optimistic that we can achieve what we need to achieve, which is to grow the party, still be who we are, talk about issues we care about. I don't want to go in and get just hardcore Democrats to vote for Republican candidates. I don't want to. That's not the approach I want. I want to go in and say we share your values and. We believe in what you believe in. You're talking about property taxes. Well, did you hear that Dan Patrick ran on the issue of educational choice and lowering property taxes? And we need to have that conversation. And I really believe at the micro level, on a small scale, what we'll be doing, this weekend, will make a big impact in the community, and we'll be able to get a lot of votes for Republican candidates because we showed up. Now, the trick is going to be scaling all of this, right? The online side, the digital side, paid media side is actually easy to scale. It takes a lot of money, but you have to commit to do it. Abbott's going to do that. Cornyn's going to do that. I'm hopeful the other candidates will do that. The party's invested in that. On the grassroots side, I think the key is really, you guys. I mean, it's really folks running for local offices, knocking on the doors, making the calls, building these relationships, making sure the information you're getting is also making its way in. My mom ran for city council in my tiny little town, and in our community, no one even knocked on, for 50 years, no one ever knocked on certain doors in that town. Well, she went and knocked on all of them, like 3 times. And she just threw the roof in that community. And you see this play out time and time again. But it's got to be done from the ground up. This is why kind of that article in the Tribune talked about the Tea Party style politics. They don't really understand what I was saying to what I was saying. The approach is that it's got to be from the grassroots up. It's got to be real. It's got to be working in the actual community. It's got to be driven from people running for city council, running for local offices. It's got to be done by the precinct captains, precinct chairs. We're blessed to have James Dickey, as the new county chairman. The guy's doing this work. So I think I'm hopeful. I think that the other thing I'll say about us, vis-a-vis Battleground Texas, is that they are kind of a fraud. And I'm not supposed to say this too loudly because we want to make sure everybody's ginned up and ready to fight, but they're all propaganda. They're not registering a lot of new voters at all. In fact, the Abbott guys have been studying this pretty closely, and they're like, most of the new voter registrants that are happening in Texas, they're leaning Republican by at least conservatively 4 or 5 points. So if Battlegrounds registering voters, then keep doing it because we're looking good so far. My fear, and I think Cornyn shows his fear too, my fear is what are we doing to shrink the party? What are we doing to alienate people? What are we doing to hinder the work that we're trying to do? Now, there needs to be a healthy debate about things like immigration, right? There needs to be a healthy debate about our platform and what it means and things like that. I'll be honest, I think there was some consternation about what came out of the convention. Not even what the platform said, but how it was reported. Anna Tinsley at the Forward Star Telegram did more damage to us than anybody by covering gay reparative therapy, they hate illegal immigrant, or they hate immigrants, and whatever else. And we know this, most of this stuff isn't true. There are some, people on the fringes of everything. But the fact that that's all they're talking about, and the fact that that's how we're perceived, does damage. And when you read Spanish language newspapers, they don't distinguish between illegal immigrants and legal immigrants. They say inmigrantes. It's one word, inmigrantes, immigrants. And the Republicans want to restrict immigrants. So I think from a messaging standpoint, we can be tough on border security. In fact, Latino voters, all the polling I've seen, all the numbers I've seen, the anecdotes, if you say we believe in securing the border first, they're with you. 60% of Latino voters in Texas are with you. Now it gets trickier when you talk about, you say, well, I'm not for amnesty, I'm not for path to citizenship. They're for that, don't get me wrong, but you can say, well, we'll just agree to disagree. But let's talk about education, let's talk about jobs. I feel strongly about this on immigration, no amnesty, secure the border first. You feel strongly that people should be able to become citizens. Let's agree to disagree, but let's talk about something else. Let's talk about how we should honor our veterans. Let's talk about these other things, because we're not going to get them to agree with us on that, and we're probably not going to change our minds. But I think we can get their votes if we don't offend them or insult them. I think that's pretty simple, and I don't think that means we have to change our position on immigration. I think that securing the border and I think talking about what's happening, these kids coming from Central America, talking about it from a humanitarian perspective. Why don't we own that space? We want to secure the border because otherwise, literally, people are going to die in the deserts, and we don't want that. We don't want children to be sexually assaulted. So I think a lot of our elected officials have actually done a good job talking about that on the state level, and Cornyn, Cruz, Abbott, McCall, others, and the state level too, have been talking about that in a pretty good way. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. We're trying to grow the party, expand the party. I'm again a Tea Party Republican. It's very important to me that the Tea Party movement and Tea Party voters have a big voice in the party. I think we are the majority viewpoint in the party, but there's also room for folks that disagree. There's folks that have a different position on certain issues, and the platform is a perfect place to go fight that out. But let's do it in a way that thinks about the public relations aspect of the platform. Is there anything we can take out or leave out or put in that makes it a little bit more PR friendly? Just something to think about. I believe we can have there are two main factions kind of in the GOP. I think we can move forward together, and I think we can go get a lot of other folks to vote for us. One fun fact: Rand Paul. I'm a big Rand Paul fan. His approval rating among African Americans in Kentucky is 30%. 30%. Why? He shows up everywhere. Most of them are centered in the Louisville area. He goes, he speaks. The NAACP said, we don't agree with him on very much, but he's a nice guy. He comes and talks to us. Again, NAACP, I've clashed with them on all sorts of stuff. But the fact that he's getting 30%, it tells you that this will pay dividends if we do it. He's also talking about the right issues. Again, criminal justice reform, keeping taxes low, education, school choice. He has a great agenda for that, and I think that's something we can learn from. So I'm optimistic. We are moving in the right direction on all these fronts. We are seeing more campaigns not only spend more on digital as a part of their paid media budget, they're serious about it. I think our field program is overall getting better and better here in the state. I've told a lot of national reporters this. I said, come to Texas because we're really going to be the Republican Party of the 21st century. You're going to see this model become the model of all state parties around the country, and the RNC will be saying this is where you go to learn how to do this stuff, how to win, how to build a party, and be successful. So, sorry for talking so much, but really excited about this topic. So thank you guys.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Got a couple of concerns, not about what you're saying, but about obstacles that we're having to deal with. And you sort of talked about one at the end. Because the Tea Party is so grassroots, we have a lot of political unsophisticates now having microphones in which to say things in a very easy to pan way.
Right.
And how it seems like part of our effort, a significant part of our effort, should be to training our new folks in how to engage and how to present the message in a more winsome way? And is there any efforts towards that in our social media stuff? And then the second obstacle I see is that conservatives tend to be very privacy oriented. And so that seems to be an obstacle to getting good data, because what our whole thing is we want to keep big data out of our lives.
Right.
So how do you manage that tension?
Yeah. Good questions. And the latter question first. I mean, I think good relationships and trust, and saying we're not going to sell your stuff and we're not going to spam you and do things like that, and showing them value. So just getting an email address. I signed up for an email address the other day at Topgolf just to get like special savings or whatever. I'm never going to read it, but getting something of value in return for your email is key. So I've always approached grassroots activists and organizations and everything the same way, a service center model approach, right? At Freedom Works, we talk about this, like, what can we do that you need that helps you achieve what you want to achieve? And so I think, what can we do for voters? What can we do for activists in the Republican Party? What can we do for, Tea Party activists that may feel a little, left out or whatever? I mean, I think if we approach it that way, and we offer things of value, and sometimes it is a free T-shirt, sometimes it's something more, more kind of helpful to what it is they're working on, offering training, offering access, a special thing with Senator Cornyn, a Google Hangout or something with Abbott, that type of stuff can help you with that.
I actually got involved through the American Majority group.
Okay.
And I started going that's how I got involved. Went to like one of their grassroots things at the Capitol, and that really launched into things. But that kind of thing is where you get people to the Republican Party. It was just like, hey, you out there looking around, wishing you could do more, and then it really starts seeing how things really work, how to really effectively do
Well,
it.
and on that note, and on the messaging side too, I remember, again, February 2009 is when I got involved with what really became the Tea Party movement. There were a number of protests that happened around the country. And the very first one we worked with, Mary Rajovich in Fort Myers, Florida, she was like, I want to go, I want to go do this protest, and I don't know if anyone will show up. I'm like, just go, take your husband and your friends, just show up. And Charlie Crist was going to meet with Obama to, talk about their bailouts or whatever. And she shows up, and she does this protest, and next thing you know, Neil Cavuto is calling us, being like, hey, what's going on down there? We're like, yeah, you should interview her. She goes and does an interview, and of course she's like frightened to do a national interview on TV, but I'm like, just say what you feel, what you believe, and but she did such a great job. And I remember from that moment through probably 2010 elections, we were all very, very sophisticated, very much on message. As a Tea Party movement, as Republicans, we focused on fiscal issues. And this may be a little controversial, but I'll say it. In 2009, 2010, the Tea Party was all about, no more bailouts, reduce the size of government, more liberty. It's pretty much it. We didn't talk about gay marriage, we didn't talk about abortion. I'm for traditional marriage, I'm pro-life, but we didn't make it the centerpiece of our efforts. And we elected not only the most fiscally conservative government, House ever, probably, in 2010. We also elected the most pro-life and the most socially conservative, class in 2010. And so, to me, if you want to win and you want to govern and you want to be, want to have the office, I'm not saying don't say what you believe when asked, but just like I was saying with talking to folks about amnesty and immigration, like maybe just kind of switch a little, change gears a little. Is that fight really? The fight is worth having legislatively. It's worth having when it comes up, but is it really what you want to lead with? It's amazing to me how disciplined we were as a movement in 2009, 2010. Something did happen in 11. What I think happened is that the Tea Party movement started out actually very young, urban, tech-savvy, and libertarian leaning. I know the first 3,000 people that showed up in February 2009, that's who they were. It was urban settings. We organized on Twitter and Facebook. It was a little bit more, it was a little more libertarian leaning. And so, as it got more and more successful and bigger, and it moved out of the cities into the suburbs and the rural areas, you did get more traditional conservatives, you got more social conservatives, and that's great, but it also brought in, it was successful, so everyone glommed on and said, I'm a Tea Partier too. And they all tried to make it about their cause. So now, even, what I would consider kind of more, more like extremist groups or whatever, which, they have every right to glom on, but they glom on and give us all a bad name, right? And so I think that sort of happened. So message discipline is key, but we could never control who came into our rally with signs. We try to kind of like be like, that's just, you got to get out of here with that. But you know, we believe in freedom.
I'm going to respectfully disagree a little
Fair
bit
enough.
about extremist St. Yar, because I was at the first one. I think there was always the quote unquote extremist element. I say quote unquote. I mean, Libertarian Party people, folks, you know, because there were. In fact, Korn spoke at one of the event, and he did not get a good reception.
Yeah, heard about that.
They're like, you know, traitor, bailout, you know, all this stuff going on. The first one, which was an awesome event because, you know, yeah, you come into early 2009, you think of it from a Republican perspective, Obama won, he's like riding this huge wave, and you're thinking, you know, okay, you know, the country's gone. After a couple of years where you couldn't get more than 3 Republicans to show up at anything. And then downtown Austin, suddenly they have this thing, and it's like, hey, maybe we should go, you know, maybe there'll be some people there. And there was like 2,000 people. I was like, wow.
It was so crazy.
Okay.
But oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
My rebuttal to what you're saying is, so I'm standing there and then Perry shows up. You had Michael Williams, he gave an awesome speech, and then a few other folks. And the guy behind me is going, secede, secede. This is in March 2009. And so there are always some folks there who are just kind of showing up and saying, hey, here's our chance to like express, you know, our own point.
And guess who the media will find?
Oh, that's who they do.
Well, that's the point, and that's why, I mean, I agree, everything you said about what happened with the convention is true, but I feel like no matter what Republicans do, if there's any change in armor, if we do anything, it might be 1% of what we're about, but they will climb onto that. I mean, nobody even noticed that one particular, the problem is having 300 planks, you'll find the most, you know, absurd of those 300, and then that would be the one thing they talk about, and not what we probably should make our platform, the 2 pages of principles at the beginning that really talks about what we're about, you know, the Constitution, the rule of law, freedom, limited government, responsibility, and those other things.
I agree. The result of the convention is affirmation of the principle, less is more. It was too much. And a lot of the stuff is not germane as to our principles.
Yeah.
And fights we didn't need to pick.
But I think if the media went after the 1% part of what the Democrats are about, they'd be laughed out of the room.
But it is what it is.
In Washington, there was, in 2006, I guess it was, 2005, there were some big anti-war protests. And I remember walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, we infiltrated them, and we were getting all kinds of video and pictures. There were communist guys there. I got people on video saying Fidel Castro, yes, he's better than President Bush. Yes, I'd rather live in Cuba. Yes, they have literacy rates of 99%. I mean, these guys, and I would send that to the Washington Post, and they,
the difference is
they
folks
completely
like
ignored it.
that are mentors for our current president.
Well, that's true. But actually, what's funny, and again, I won't name the reporter, but at the Post, finally, someone calls me up and she's like, "Brendan, I just want to tell you, we had a discussion about this over coffee at the office of the Post. We missed the story." I'm like, "We missed what story?" "The Tea Party." And I'm just like, this is after our huge 9/12/2009 event that we did. It had like 500,000 people at the Capitol, which Josh and I.
Is it the Glenn Beck one?
No, this is 2009 before September.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Freedom Works was well known.
Well, I actually got the permit, and Josh and I set the route and everything, and like we contacted all the media at Freedom Works, and the only people that showed up were international press. It was literally like it didn't happen.
So the Post, did they do any story on it, or was it a Metro
I don't know if they did
story?
something afterwards, but she said, I mean, this is a few months later still. She's like, we missed the story. So we sat down, and this is another part of my argument I would make on how to deal with the media. You know, we sat down for hours after that, and she interviewed myself and my colleagues about this movement and what it was. And we were able to shape that narrative. You know, the Tribune article that came out, y'all saw that, but it was kind of about what we're trying to do with non-traditional Republican voters. I mean, I spent a lot of time with Corey sitting down talking about her and her baby that she just had, and we were building a relationship. I don't trust the media, but I feel like they're going to write what they write. So if we don't give them access and we don't give them something to work with, and we don't deliver the message, it's going to be really bad. So let's make it not so bad. And frankly, I mean, we've had success doing that. Some of the best coverage that I ever got, that we ever got for our work was actually, believe it or not, CNN and the New York Times. By giving them access, letting them come in and see behind the curtain. I mean, they did some fantastic stuff. They also did some really bad stuff, mostly from their editors. But the reporters, they want that. And so if you give them, and I don't know how much of the stuff with Anna Tinsley in particular, you know, how much of it was due to just her bias or her not being courted. I mean, we've been trying to sit down with her for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think that we've got to get in front of those guys, because they still matter. As much as the internet matters, talk radio matters, the Blaze matters, 4 Star Telegram still reaches the people we need to reach for a while.
All right.
We're heading into the 1 o'clock, and looks like these.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna scarf
Finish
down
that.
some Mac.
Yeah, I want to just once again thank you.
Oh, wait,
Thank
we
you.
did that.
You sure? Oh yeah. Thank you. I want to bring that one.
That's our honorary.